If you're creating without consent, context, and connection, it's not innovation, it's just colonialism by a different name.
Welcome to Moral Footprint, the podcast where we unlearn, rethink, and take action. I'm your host, Jeni Miles, and together we'll challenge the systems we've inherited, confront the crises of our time, and, most importantly, move from awareness to meaningful change. Today, I'm in conversation with Ryan James Kemp. He's a transformative leader, educator, and what he calls a systems evolutionary, specializing in awareness-based systems creation. I love how he brings together so many different threads of wisdom in our chat. He spent over 14 years traveling around the world, sitting with Indigenous communities, and really getting to the heart of how our worldviews shape everything about our relationship with Earth and each other. Ryan and I dive into what it really means to shift from seeing the world as a series of transactions to seeing it as a web of relationships. He got me thinking about the words I use every day, how I practice gratitude, or not, and even what I think progress actually means. If you're like me and sometimes wonder why all our sustainability efforts don't seem to be moving the needle enough, or how we might actually transform our economy to truly support life, Ryan offers some really eye-opening insights. We talk about everything from word origins to growing your own food, and we tackle that big question: how do we stop just tweaking broken systems and start creating something genuinely new? Hey Ryan, welcome to Moral Footprint. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Really good to be here. And good morning. Aloha kakahiaka from Oahu.
I wish I was there right now. I'm in quite a cloudy, grey Hertfordshire in England at the moment. I wanted to start with a way that you've described yourself on Instagram. On your bio, you say that you're a relational intelligence weapon of mass creation. And that's a really bold and intriguing phrase. So can you maybe unpack a bit about what that means?
Yeah, well, good observation of the Instagram phrase. Relational intelligence is something that is really important in a world that is optimized for transactionality. Relational intelligence has to do with pattern sensing, discernment, resonance, reciprocity, a way of being in harmony with other beings. Transactions is a phrase that operates in objectification. So we live in a world that highlights transactionality, which essentially highlights destruction of the web of
And
life.
separation.
And separation, right? So anything that brings other beings into objects enables them to be extracted, exploited, treated in such a way where there isn't a relationship, there isn't a relationality. So part of this separation conditioning, part of the coloniality that is continuing throughout our systems currently with the same playbook repeated over and over ad infinitum, is that it optimizes for transactionality anthropocentrically so that we can benefit, which ultimately, since we're a part of the planet, ends up destroying things, not creating things. And similar to what Vandana Shiva says, it's not an investment if it's killing the planet. We think we're creating, we think we're progressing, but is it really progress? Is it really an investment if we're destroying the very thing that keeps us alive, because we are what we're destroying? So to have that level of intelligence is what I'm labeling as relational intelligence, the recognition of relativity in the sense of that tree has agency and animacy and life, that being, that animal, that beach, that mountain, right? And you can see this a little bit in the rights of nature in this movement that's coming up, but that's an intelligence of relationality. So that's in short what that phrase is talking about. And I'm sure through that description, we can parse out a couple things that would be cool to talk about.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is when we think about intelligence in the sort of dominant discourse, we think about these potentially tech billionaires. They have created these like incredible inventions and there's technological progress. That's what we see as like innovation and intelligence. But what you're saying is that's completely missing the mark, because it's ignoring that we are in relation, we exist in relation to others, and we cannot exist without others, not just other humans, but other beings and nature itself.
Yeah, exactly. And intelligence, I mean, everything depends on your frame, right? Like you're saying, the dominant discourse. So the worldview that we're embedded in as a consensus, and when I say these things, I'm speaking in relative generalizations, just like with when people say the Anthropocene, right? Someone who is, for example, having a massive factory that's producing vehicles is an anthropos, is a human, but there's also an anthropos in Papua New Guinea who is not having the same impact as that person. So to label it the Anthropocene and render all humans at the same level of that destruction isn't really fair either.
Yeah, what we're kind of getting at here is it's the power dynamics, isn't it? That there are some humans who are causing a lot more harm than billions of others. And that's where they lack relational intelligence, even though dominant culture in the West, in the global North, has, since coloniality kind of began, that has been lauded as progress, when actually that is what is causing so much destruction.
Yes. And there's a couple things I want to touch into here. First, I want to continue with this framing because a lot of people really talk about their mindset a lot. And the mindset is not the deepest root. The deepest root is the worldview or the epistemology, the way of knowing.
Yeah.
So, as I sometimes say, the mind is set in the worldview. The worldview is the lens through which we see the world. Through the worldview, or the epistemology, the way of knowing, that's how we obtain information. That's how we orient ourselves in relationship or not with life. And with the current dominant hegemonic worldview in the consensus, the definition of intelligence is one that is based on a technologic or a technological progress. But I say technologic with that emphasis on the different syllable on purpose, because the logic is machine logic.
Yeah, it's not living logic.
Yeah, it's not ecology, it's not ecologic, right? So there's a really big difference between these logics. So in the intelligence spectrum of the technologic, basically what that's doing is optimizing for efficiency without the recognition that my entire being is dependent upon and the least evolved species here on the planet, right? Because the anthropocentric gaze, which is part of the unholy trinity, if you will, is based upon the fact that we're the peak of evolution, not the youngest species, and that everything is here to serve us. Rather, if I lose my arm, my leg, or my eye, I can still live. But if I lose food, air, or water, I die. And yet I'm more concerned about this physical body than I am with the earth body.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting thing because our intelligence is actually optimizing ourself out of the system. So we have to discontinue what we're doing to continue. And that for me isn't a form of intelligence, really. That's a form of cleverness. Intelligence, as we defined it earlier, or described it rather, and there's a difference between definition and description, is relational intelligence. So take care of the things that take care of you, and you will live forever. And I don't mean Ryan, lives until I'm 9,000 years old, but if you do things in that way, that's actually sustainability.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It sounds like what you're describing is true sustainability, where what the dominant discourse of sustainability is, hey, there's going to be some trade-offs and we're going to cause harm, but we're doing things a bit better. But that's not true sustainability at all. I also want to pick up on really what I see as a extra layer here, that so much of what is valuable to us, and in terms of value as in we would not exist without it, we sort of render it as of no value. We render it as invisible. We kind of pretend it doesn't exist. So how do we transform that worldview when, as you say, the context of our worldview is in many ways, it takes a lot of work to unsee that, doesn't it? It takes a lot of work to unlearn something that feels natural, quote unquote.
Right. One of my uncles, he describes it, instead of the American dream, he describes it as the American hypnosis. And he works in hypnotherapy. So he says it's really important to know how to lead people in, really, so you can lead people out. So these conditionings essentially have hypnotized us into perceiving reality in a specific way as the exclusive truth in that reality. Everything else has to be measured up against that truth. So, for example, even like indigenous science, right, has to be measured up in the context of Western science, even though that's not relevant because they don't have the same worldview and they don't have the same processes. They don't have the same ruler.
Yeah, it's like a sense of superiority, isn't it? Versus anything that's not the global Western hegemony, anything that's not, technological, sort of just rendering things that we rely on as completely useless to us when, to your point, we cannot exist without those. I'd like to talk a bit about your journey to unlearning this dominant worldview, because presumably were you raised in North America? Can we talk about how your travels outside of that context, how did that help you unpack the dominant worldview, the way that it kind of severs our interdependence with other beings. And I think tied to that is, what are some of the most profound lessons that you've learned from traveling extensively and working with so many indigenous communities?
Yeah, I graduated from Northeastern University in Boston. I grew up around there too, like 20 minutes north of Boston. I graduated with a finance degree, and about halfway through university, I grew a little bit tired of Boston. And I was on the Division 1 baseball team too, and I no longer was going to participate playing baseball because I realized that that wasn't my dream, that was my parents' dream. And so I decided to move to Hong Kong to study Chinese philosophy. So when I was 20, I moved to Hong Kong, and that was an eye-opening experience. I was 20 years old, and I'd been to like Cancun or, something like this.
Yeah.
Not
On like spring break.
exactly, but like nothing like that. Nothing to the degree that I had realized that there was not one reality, that there were many different ways of perceiving this world that we share. And when I came back, I felt a little strange, and people said I had reverse culture shock. And I later came about realizing that it was reverse lack of culture shock. So I then left and went to Spain and studied and finished my university in Spain. And I was recruited by a social entrepreneurship professor at Northeastern to go and work on a project in Bali Nyonga, which is a small village in the northwest of Cameroon, close to the border of Nigeria. And I lived there for a year. I was 22, and I moved to this farming village, pretty jungle. I had to go get water from a stream in a jerry can, shower out of cups, kill my own chickens. I mean, the village
Bit
life.
of a far cry from your finance degree.
Exactly. And when I was there, I was exposed to the depths of all of what they didn't teach me in school. So whatever history, right? We view this thing as history as in the past, But
it still creates the present.
Yeah, and as Bio Akomolafe says, the past is not yet done. So the patterns of the past are continuing because they're not actually in the past. And many of these things that we read about in history, they're still happening. Colonization and coloniality, that's the difference between those two words, right? Colonization was a process that happened. Coloniality is the ongoing patterning that continued from that process. So when I was in Cameroon, I basically saw that the majority of what I learned in school was not valid because it was based on a specific way of seeing something. And that's when I started to connect my experience in Hong Kong with the experience in Cameroon, is that, well, your reality is formed through how you view something. And I have the ability to view something differently than everybody else who I'm surrounded with in that place. So now with all this sort of scrambled information, like what's real, what's not, I have a degree. Aren't I supposed to use it? But that doesn't make sense. Why would I work in a company that has a cubicle and isn't doing something like this? Like there's people in the village who don't have medicine. There's people in the village who don't have roads. There's 50% of their food's going to waste. Aren't there bigger, more important social things than me having a software for some pharmaceutical company? These are like some of the thoughts, right? Soon thereafter, because I couldn't make sense of it, I went out to Hawaii, really to learn to grow my own food, because I was with a lot of farmers in Cameroon, and I saw that I didn't know how to grow my own food. I never had seen a tomato plant in my whole life.
But you'd eaten thousands.
But I'd eaten thousands of them.
Yeah.
I'd never planted a seed in the ground, and yet I'd eaten my whole life. Like, isn't that a problem? Wait a second, Like, how did I have food my whole life if I don't know anything about food? So I went out to Hawaii, and that's where I met my first teachers, and they basically reoriented me to travel around the world. And I did so for the next 14 years, and here I am.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I want to dig into with that, but the first one I would say is this idea of that our education going through school and as we kind of grow up into the world, we're taught a certain viewpoint, as you say, but it feels like there's so many, to me now that I have learned a lot, especially with the Rebeers course, which we'll talk about in a moment, but there's so many truths that need to be brought into more public consciousness because we need to heal from them. You say that, for example, coloniality is still happening. It's embarrassing for me that I didn't know the true harm that the British Empire brought onto the world. I only saw from a lot of my education as a British school student all of the great things to be proud of, that we started the Industrial Revolution. I didn't learn anything about the costs to other global South countries, about the cost to other people. Is it that we need to educate more people with these different perspectives? Was that the goal of Rebeers, or how can we square that? that peg that people don't know some of the basic facts about their own culture or lack thereof, shall we say.
So as far as an answer, I looked up this word recently. I really enjoy etymology. So someone was like, "Can you give me the answer here?" And I'm like, "Wait a second. What's answer mean?" They're like, "What?" So I look up answer, and answer in its etymological root comes with a weight of responsibility in it. So if I'm to give somebody an answer, they then inherit a responsibility to act accordingly with what they've heard.
Oh, that's incredible.
And I don't necessarily know if we as a collective are ready for the responsibility of the true answers yet. So people want solutions, but these things come with responsibility. If you're given a cartography of how to navigate your life in a way that would actually shift and transform, and it requires you to do so in addition, then that's a responsibility, and it's not something that you can just toss aside after you've started, like a styrofoam cup, you know? So to continue on what you're saying, I just wanted to preface that because I recommend anybody who speaks to look into the etymology of the words that they're sharing so that they can remember what the true capacity and meaning of that word is, because we've lost a lot of that as the languages have become diluted and pulled out of their roots, which coincidingly enough is exactly what has happened with coloniality, right? It's been pulled out of its roots. It's a disassociated movement of energy. And yes, Rebiz started as an awareness-based systems creation school. Awareness-based being an important phrase because at the baseline of any transformation and change, there has to be awareness. And there has to be awareness. You have to know where you are. You have to know who you are.
Yeah, your context.
Your context. And as one of my teachers, Kumu Ramsey, says, he says, the world has infinite content. There's actually too much content that we're drowning in it, but very little and seldom is that content ever rooted in context. And the most important thing is to have contextual relevance, not content. So you have to move from the root into the content, not from the content disembodied, disassociated, and try to fit it into a context that it's not coming from. That creates disembodiment. And we're witnessing that more and more. I mean, AI could be viewed as disembodied intelligence, right? Yeah. Jesus, after his resurrection, was disembodied. Right. So there's this whole thing about the connection of religion and how we think God is in the sky and is a male. We don't think God is feminine.
Is part of us and everything around us. Yeah.
Yeah. And the leaves and the rain and all of these other things, which is what the people knew, So yeah, Rebiz started as this base level, this foundational level of providing people a way to interconnect the dots between some things that feel disparate and disconnected, but they're actually entangled. Like, for example, grief or our ancestry or our worldview or language or gratitude or I mean, any of these things, right? They're all entangled. And if we don't grieve, for example, depending on who you ask, we don't have the capacity to truly love. And if we don't have the truly capacity to love, then how are we going to orient our passions to make an impact in something that we really care about if we're suppressing our care because we don't actually want to grieve and feel to the depth of what's happening in the world?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There's all of these things so that's what Rebiz started as, was just to provide people with a space to not know, actually. Because not knowing...
Yeah, to realize how much they didn't know.
Right. I mean, not knowing is a state of power. And we've been told that it's a state of weakness, but it's a state of power because when you say that you don't know, you open up the space for you to actually get to know. But if you think that you know when you don't, then you're limiting your capacity to actually know.
Yeah, they do say that there's a point when you're becoming an expert in a certain field. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you know about the field that you thought you knew lots about. But I want to share a quote that was really memorable when I was on the Rebiz course, which was over a year ago now, while I was still working full-time at Google, and sort of, I'll just maybe share a bit about why I was really intrigued by Rebiz. So I was working in a full-time tech company. I had, 2 children, a full-time mum, trying to make everything work, while also starting to become much more aware of the broader global systemic issues that we're facing. And I felt really sort of powerless, I guess, in some ways. But that was kind of my journey into Rebiz. And it was great to meet other people, figure out their own journey. And as you say, figure out their own context. You talked about ancestry. Depending on whose lands you're living on, many people haven't even interrogated
whose ground is your house on? So I think that's an interesting aspect. But the quote that I was going to mention was, you asked everyone on the call, you said, how can you advocate and work in sustainability if you can't even grow your own food? And I remember really listening to that, and I was like, that is such a really obvious point, isn't it? But I had never connected the dots. I was thinking about sustainability from a very sort of rational, let's learn and let's get all this knowledge, but I hadn't considered what it meant to even embody and to connect with what sustains me. You talked a lot about reconnecting with what actually sustains us, our water, our air, our food, our ecosystems. For people who haven't yet taken the Rebiz course and they feel disconnected from what actually sustains us, where's a good place for them to start to get reconnected?
Yeah. Beautiful to hear that quote stuck and
Yeah,
that you
I
had a
remember
good
it really well.
experience too. Yeah, that one, it's a powerful one. That one often silences rooms when I share it.
Yeah, because everyone's like, I'm a hypocrite.
They're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's similar to one of the first questions that I ask in the course, right? And it's funny that I call it a course because people come out of it and they're like, "That's not a course. I don't know what that was, but I feel really different and I feel really good." But I ask normally, and I did this when I was speaking in Prague too, at an event for a VC company. I said, "How many of you here care about the planet?" And everyone raised their hand. How many of you really want to do something that has an impact for life? Everyone raised their hand. How many of you have ever said thank you to the water?
No hands.
Zero. Crickets. A glass broke, And I'm like, well, why am I asking this, right? This goes back to relational intelligence. If you want to save something, first of all, we're saying we want to save the planet, right? That's already a kind of a strange thing. If you want to save something, if you want to fix something and you don't have a relationship with it, you don't think that it's alive, you have never even said thank you, you don't know that thing. Water is life, right? In Lakota, they say mini wachoni. Water is life. That means they're synonyms. And if you go anywhere in the world and there's not water, let me know if you see life.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a relationship with life, which is water, how are you going to benefit and save life if you don't even have a relationship with life? If you've been taking for granted the very thing that keeps you alive, try to go 4 or 5 days without water. Let me know what happens. Let me know that you're not like praying and saying thank you to the water, which is where these rituals and ceremonies like Vision Quest and things come in, is they teach you about right relationship, right? This is why they were initiatory steps in becoming a human, because you're not born as a human. You have to become a human.
Yeah.
And you become a human through your awareness and connections and relationships.
And also your dependency on others. Yeah, no human can
Exactly.
make it by themselves. There is no man on this planet, no woman on this planet who did not have thousands of people in some way influence them coming into existence.
Totally. Which is why I often gawk at the phrase self-made entrepreneur.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, who birthed you? Who fed you? Who taught you English? Who gave you your first connection and contract? How are you self-made? Is this like the Immaculate Conception? But you just like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're interdependent, and the key part about interdependence is that there has to be a baseline of self-actualization. And this is often what I share in the learning journey as well about Abraham Maslow, because people really like Maslow somehow, even though he's
Yeah,
like
they
super,
love that hierarchy.
super old. They love it. What they don't know is that Maslow appropriated that pyramid from the Siksika people from the Blackfoot Nation. And the pyramid, Maslow's pyramid, the top is self-actualization, unless you go back and read his latest writings, whenever he did them, which was self-transcendence. But the pyramid was actually a teepee, and at the base of the pyramid was self-actualization, because you had to be self-actualized in order to serve the community and life in a higher order function. So here we are living our life trying to get into some state of our own self-actualization, and that's the beginning of the process, right? So long story short, or short story long, basically to get people back into relationship with life, my main suggestion to feel connection is to connect. And even if it might feel, what do they say, fake it till you make it? They say that stuff sometimes. It's like recognize the animacy, recognize the living nature of your surroundings. Figure out where you are. Figure out the name of the place that you are. Go find one tree that you visit over the course of a year and just see how it changes, and maybe see how you're changing in a similar way to that tree. Maybe as the tree sheds its leaves, you're also shedding something. Maybe as the summer gets hot and your mood increases, the trees, flowers are like buoyant, you know? So just recognize that there's a mirror and that there's things to connect with because they're not objects, they're living and they have animacy and they have consciousness. And just begin to connect, even if it feels weird, just start that process, because without the recognition of nature with us embedded in it, or in her as such, we're going to continue to treat everything as objects and make them serve us. But if you can animate life itself, then you recognize how our role here is to steward, and steward is support that flourishing of life, because when life flourishes, we also flourish.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to pick up on what you talked about with gratitude, because you've spoken before about how gratitude, I think you called it like an antidote to consumerism, because in a way, consumerism is driven by just artificial wants. It's not driven by needs. And gratitude for what sustains us is based on what we actually need to survive. So can you share more about how this could change our relationship with defining what it even means to have well-being as a person? It's not about the stuff that we have, is it, necessarily?
Yeah, it's a differentiation that one of my uncles makes. He says, it's not about the good life, it's about the good living. The good life is, I have a nice couch, I have a nice pool, I have a nice car, I live the good life, maybe even drink Miller High Life or something like this too. But the good life is about what you have, and what you have is based on what you consume through objects, what you possess, right? The paradox is that your possessions end up possessing you. The good living is a way that you live. So it doesn't have to do with what you have. It's about how you live. So once again, it's a verb. It's not a noun, right? So gratitude within this, a lot of people have gratitude for like their house, or they have gratitude for the various different possessions that they have. That's at least, I think, maybe the first step is people start to at least recognize that they should be thankful for something.
Yeah, for the
Right.
material things, even just to begin with. Yeah, like
Right.
where did the metal of this car come from? Where did the
Right.
bricks of even of this fireplace, where did they come from? You know,
Well,
just having gratitude for that.
that's even an advanced state of like you recognize that things are made of things and they came from somewhere,
Yeah.
right? But after a while, you start to see that maybe there's other things you should be grateful for beyond your objects, like your family, your friends, your children. I think that people do often have, they say they have gratitude, or at least this is what I've seen, and through my own experience, until my gratitude started to evolve into a deeper and deeper level. I would say that I was grateful for somebody, but I wouldn't act like it. You know?
It was just words.
It was just words. And the concept is great to have, just like the worldviews are not concepts. The worldviews are a way of living that can be conceptualized,
Yeah.
right? So gratitude is not a concept. Gratitude is a way of living that can be conceptualized. And the example I often give is, let me say that I have gratitude for water. That's really great. And then I walk by the river near my house and there's plastic all in the river and I don't clean it up. Is that really gratitude? You know? So in what way are we actually not connecting and feeling grateful for all of the beauty in our life to the degree that we then simultaneously take it for granted? So
Yeah.
this energy of entitlement is one that is bereft of gratitude, because somehow we've assumed that we deserve something. And there's this kind of toxic movement that happens where it's like, I deserve that. I deserve that. It's like, well, sure, you do. And why does your deserving of what you have strip the people in these other countries of their ability to have that thing? Because now your entitlement creates destruction
Creates
and
harms
harm
to
for
them.
another. So to build your gratitude, you have to, really what I like is entangled gratitude, you know? The ability to witness the entanglements of all of us and find a way to build reciprocal models of care, not carrying capacity, but caring capacity. You know, so how do we actually build these systems? This is what's really important. And just deepen our perception of what gratitude is. And this is why it's awareness-based systems creation. It's not systems change. Ultimately, it's systems revelation, which is actually why I'm in Oahu, as I'm giving a talk on this. It's beyond systems change, it's systems revelation. But how do we enable the awareness in us to witness and work internally so that we can actually shift to the degree that we can make the system absent of the conditions that bring the elephant in the room in the first place?
Yeah, I love that. And you talked about caring capacity. And what I'm hearing a lot of is actually about taking responsibility for what we say we're grateful for. So it almost feels like step one is, I am actually grateful for water. But step two is, okay, well, you're grateful for the water, but yeah, get the plastic when you walk past it. Don't just ignore it and treat it as someone else's problem. And I also think like starting from ourselves and doing those small actions is something that more of us should be thinking about. Often when I talk to various people about, what can we do when we feel potentially powerless, people will say, I'm just one person. There's nothing I can do with these broader systems. And I think that's a bit of a cop-out. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this perceived binary of individual versus system, because what you're sort of alluding to is there is no true individual in a silo, that we are actually part of the systems, and therefore we do have a responsibility and power to actually influence them in some way and to take responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. For those who think they're only one person and that therefore they shouldn't do something, let me know if you're ever not one person. It's like the United States is obese, so I'm not going to exercise. It's kind of
Yeah,
ridiculous,
it's just my culture.
right? Right. It's everyone. I mean, the country's obese. What would me exercising even do? Like, bring it back in, scale down your impact. So, and I always quote my uncles. I have a lot of them, around the world, but they're like, man, when I hear impact, I want to have less.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to have a bigger impact. Why? If a meteorite came, I don't want that thing to have a really small impact.
I love this idea of actually interrogating how can we reduce harm and have less of that negative impact.
Yeah, this individual notion, right? So
Yes.
Carl Jung says there is no individual, but there's individuation.
What does
So
individuation mean?
individuation means uniqueness. Individual means separateness. So the notion of an individual is always incorrect. But from the nature of reality, you can't be separate ever, right? But you can be individuated, and in fact you are. So there's individual, individuated. Individuated means unique. So you're unique, I'm unique, the people listening are unique, the tree is unique, the snowflake's unique, the bird's unique. And unification and unique share uni. So often what we struggle with is thinking that, for example, unification or connection has to happen through homogeneity or sameness, but actually uniqueness is the only thing that enables ecosystems to form. So if you actually relinquish your individuation through comparison and through fitting in with all of these other sort of things, as opposed to fitting out, you harm the harmonization process.
Yeah, because an ecosystem isn't 20 types of birds all the same. They all have unique adaptations and they all bring something different to the web of life.
Exactly. So that's a really important one, is the differentiation between individual and individuated, because people want to be individuals so they can be unique, but you are unique already, but you're not an individual, right? So that's really, there's a lot of differences that make a difference, and there's subtleties in these, and with our lack of care about language, we miss the subtlety, which is why I like to focus so much on language, not only for that, but because what you speak is coming from a place within you that you're going to create that energy in your life. And if you don't know what you're saying and you're spraying that all over the place, you're going to create things that you don't know the implications and repercussions of what you're creating. So it's really taking responsibility, like you're saying, of what we're creating and of our own unique gifts, about the gift economy. And I say, what are your gifts? Put those in the economy. You don't need to give me everything for free, but the gift economy
that only
isn't
you can offer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what you can offer to be useful to others, right? Because the Dalai Lama says, what are the keys of life? To be happy and useful. You can't be useful without being happy. You can't be happy without being useful. Everything that we're doing is meant to have utilization for others, and that those others don't need to be human, right? When's the last time you have seen someone build a construction that has gardens for hummingbirds?
Yeah, it's just that anthropocentric viewpoint, isn't it?
Yeah, which is so weird. Like, I walked through San Francisco, I don't know, like this maybe a year ago, and I was like, why are there only humans here? This is so weird.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
what's really
it's
interesting?
strange.
During this podcast, I can hear a lot of the birds near where you are in Hawaii. I have a few trees near me, but there's just barely any bird song. And to be fair, it's a different time of day. But even then, it kind of gets me questioning, should I be hearing them? Because I'm not, and that is also this idea of like thinking about our own context, where we're starting from, and taking responsibility, I guess, for having care about that. I know as part of the Rebiz course, something that I learned, I can't remember the exact etymology, so perhaps you can help me here. But you talked about how in business, the language is very much a language of war. Could you unpick that? And then how do you, as a business consultant in some ways, how do you then help flip the language and use that as a strategy to help businesses be more regenerative and show up in a better way?
Yeah, good question. I'll just start with chief executive officer.
Yeah, chief, yeah.
And officer.
Yeah, military.
And executive. What are you executing? Mission statement, target market, operations, strategy, bullet points, make a killing, take the flak. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So it's a language based on war, but what is it at war with? Right? We're in an ecological, geopolitical, social, spiritual, systemic moment of reckoning.
I really feel that, yeah.
And if we have a language of war, what do we expect? Why are we trying to tackle climate change? Why are we trying to fight climate change? That's the Earth. Well, you're trying to fight Earth? You're trying to tackle her? She's like...
Yeah, this is Earth's way of trying to adapt to what shit we've brought to her door, basically. And we're like, we're going to tackle it. We're going to have, it goes back to this idea of these sort of technological solutions of, let's do carbon capture. Let's take a load of carbon and chuck it into the ground and pretend it doesn't exist. I mean, it's mind-boggling, ravaging nature in order to save nature. That doesn't even make sense.
No.
It's because of the language, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's like when you want to fight for peace. Doesn't make sense. At least I don't think you're going to find peace like that.
Yeah.
You'll probably leave people in pieces, but there won't be peace. So the language itself, if it's a war-based language, there is an energy in opposition to something, right? And that's not relational. Yeah. This is where another one of my uncles, he says...
How many do you have, by the way?
Hundreds. He says, peace on earth. Do you like that phrase? And I was like, I think so. It's a good phrase, right? And he's like, peace with earth. Mm-hmm. We have this language that puts us at odds with something that we're trying to fix, that we're trying to tackle, that we're trying to fight, that we are the domineers of, that we have our operations and strategy to get that target market of who? Those are our relatives. Those are our fellow human beings. Like, why are we targeting them? Mm-hmm. Why do we have these strategies to get to the very people who we're all looking to create a beautiful life here? Like, why do businesses manipulate people? Why do I have to pay $115 for a checked bag on a plane? Like, why are you stealing? like why is everyone stealing from each other? This whole energy comes from this looting, this war energy, this thing of destruction, right? So to get back to the mass creation rather than mass destruction. So this language of war, it's very difficult to shift something with the same exact way that you think about it, because language is the way that you think, right? I can't speak in a way that I don't think. Mm-hmm. So the language is a representation of the worldview. So as we shift the worldview, we can start to shift the language. When we shift the language, we shift the way that we create. And this is not, once again, I'm not asking people to change their marketing statements to incorporate words that seem more wholesome, because the words are representative of the action. Exactly. It goes deeper than that. It's a language of truth. Not truth as this absolute thing, but don't lie.
But of how we value something, I guess, and what our relationship is to something. So I'll just give an example that's coming to mind here. And I was very immersed in it at the time because I was part of the apps growth world back in like 2015 onwards when, huge consumer tech apps were growing, getting millions of users. And there was a new type of role. It was called a growth hacker. And I wonder what the etymology of hack is, but it doesn't sound very nice, does it? Like to hack something. It implies some kind of violence. We're going to trick people into doing something. When we think about language, maybe the first thing that I'm hearing here is we can at least start interrogating, and even interrogating, now I'm questioning that as a word, but start reflecting on what words we're using and maybe calling out when we see certain forms of language kind of perpetuated on social media or in mass media. Would you say that's at least one first step we can to try and unlearn these very separatist ways of speaking about the world itself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the first process of unlearning, is to see that there is a certain way of doing things that need to be unlearned or
Yeah.
decomposed, right? I mean, I was lucky that when I first came to Oahu, one of my first teachers started doing this to me when I was 23 years old, right? I would say something and he'd be like, "How do you know that that's true?" And I'd be like, "I read it." And he's like, "How do you know that they know that that's true? Is that their experience or is that a claim?" Because if it's not their experience, it's just a claim. So then all of a sudden I started questioning what was coming out of my mouth. Then he started questioning the words that I was saying. And it got to the point that for 2 weeks I couldn't speak because I saw that everything that I was saying, I actually didn't know what I was saying. Like I was saying the word beautiful. I didn't know what the word meant. I had a thought about what the word meant, but like, what is it actually? Where's that word come from? Where do these English words come from? What are these letters? Like, and then you started reading about the alphabet, which is actually the aleph beth, and it came from the Hebrew root. And all of a sudden you see this thing about language, and it's a very interesting path to start to recognize that you don't actually know what you're saying, and you've been speaking your whole life and you've never questioned what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. So the first thing is, yeah, just start to form a level of presence being a space in between you and that which observes you, so that you can see the words that come out of your mouth and question them, to not like question your whole existence, but be like, oh, why do I use that word? Or what does that word actually mean? So to start to do that with your language is really, really a good thing. So etymology is something that's really useful for me. Also, just taking notice when you're using, like you just did with interrogating, right? Like, oh, that's kind of
Yeah.
a harsh word. Like,
Yeah.
why
It
why
feels
do I
like
use that there?
yeah, like I'm sort of like some kind of officer trying to literally interrogate you in an act of war. And that's not my intention.
No,
I'm,
totally.
this is all about learning and
Yeah,
maybe I will still question what you're saying. That's part of what you're teaching me to do as well.
exactly. There's one other thing I want to add about language. So Martin Prechtel, really amazing author. I recommend people read his books or listen to him if they can. He shares something that in order for us to understand indigenous languages, we have to subvert English back into animacy. Now that phrase there's a lot in there. So basically what I heard when I heard that is that English is inanimate. And then I started to look up English words, and around 55% of them or more are nouns.
So
So over
objects.
half of, so objects, so
Yeah.
so definitions, so frozen in time / not living, right? And then I started, okay, well, if English is inanimate in the majority of the words, then what are indigenous languages? And they're verb-based languages, so that same percentage is verbs, right? Or more. So those are not definitions, those are descriptions. And that means that everything is living and has agency, story, and a perceived level of consciousness. So what I started to notice with English is, wow, when I say tree, that essentially renders that tree an object rather than me perceiving a living tree. So I've been challenged to turn every noun that I have into a verb, which is a really cool activity with language. And the second one is try to go a day without saying the word it. So those two are also really important with language, because there's this war energy and simultaneously there's this inanimacy.
Yeah. And
And
they go hand in
those
hand,
two,
don't they?
exactly, because why would you fight something that you believe is connected and the same as you?
Yeah.
If I really recognize that life is serving life and I am life, then why would I destroy life because I destroy me?
Yeah. You're much more likely not to cut down a tree if you see that tree as the home of, hundreds of birds, lots of different species.
Exactly.
But if you see it as an object, you're much more likely to think, yeah, I'm just going to chop this down, make a table, burn some of it for fire.
Yeah.
So I completely hear that. And I think that's a really interesting challenge that I'm going to take. Try not to say the word it, and also try to, inject this feeling of things are living. And I think that will also help us be less complacent about that idea of like lack of gratitude. Because
Yep.
I was about to say all of these things, which is exactly the opposite of what we're talking about here. But that goes to show how deeply ingrained, isn't it? Like into our psyche.
Yep, literally. In addition to when you were talking, what I also heard is like we need to ask consent of living beings, right? Like we say that human relations should be consensual, but why aren't we asking the forest? So traditionally people did ask the forest for permission. The phrase that's coming is, if you're creating without consent, context, and connection, it's not innovation, it's just colonialism by a different name. So these are the sorts of energies that our language can help us to reconnect with or remember. And remember is not a conceptual act, once again, as another one of my uncles said. um, the opposite of remembering is not forgetting. The opposite of remembering is dismembering.
Yeah. Wow.
So if we're remembering something, the process is embodied. It's a process of reweaving ourselves into the tapestry of life. And it might start as a concept, but it's not complete until you have been remembered out of your dismemberment.
Yeah.
And that's the process that we're doing with nature, because people tell me, oh, I really want to reconnect with nature. I say, so that means that you're not nature, because you have to reconnect with it.
Yeah. If you can't see yourself as part of that web, then yeah, you're on a fool's errand.
Right. So there's things that are, yeah, the language is very, very key. I can't highlight enough the importance of language and how it's shifted my life. And I only recommend to people what I've experienced. I don't read a book and recommend it to them. This is part of what I've learned over 14 years of traveling. That's why my teachers sent me out. They're like, until you experience this stuff for yourself and you come to your own way of knowing or your own way of coming to knowing, then you're just going to be sharing claims with people. And you can't guide anyone if you just have claims. You have to actually live the stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. Because I think also, like, for my own journey of unlearning various cultural myths, if someone had told me 5 years ago, this is the truth, or whatever that would be, I wouldn't necessarily believe them. Because how would I believe them if I haven't lived and breathed that new opinion or that new way of seeing? You have to kind of slowly come to that. And it's sometimes a little bit scary, because it feels like that we are running out of time. There is this urgency that more people should start to unlearn these very harmful ways of interacting with the world. But maybe as like a closing thought, I would love to talk about the word innovation, because it's come up a lot in conversations I've had recently. I don't know what the etymological root of it is, but when people say the word innovation, everyone thinks about technology, don't they? They think about technology will save us. But what I'm hearing from this conversation is actually, I think the true innovation is being able to reflect on our own individuation, and also to be able to reflect on how we connect with others and with nature. That is the true innovation.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to end into the beginning. So it's kind of funny you say this, because I've actually been invited to do a talk in October in Prague. And the topic I'm talking about is iteration, innovation, and disruption.
Oh, cool.
Because most of the time when we say we're innovating, we're not innovating, we're just iterating. Because it's the same playbook, it's the same mindset, it's the same worldview. It's just, as they say in Thailand, same but different.
Yeah.
Carbon credits is not innovative. Why? Because it's the financialization of nature attempting to solve a problem of commodification, which was created by the financialization of nature. That's not innovation, that's iteration. So the majority of what people are even doing with technology is not innovative, because for something to be innovative, there has to be a gap, right? Between what is and what is becoming, or from being to becoming, right? So innovation, yes, like you're saying, it requires us to utilize our intelligence in a specific way. So how do we utilize our intelligence in a specific capacity with our own gift, with our own blueprint, so that we can plug into creation, which is life, in a specific way that we create a unique thing within that supports other beings in life. Iteration is just going to be this sort of samsaric wheel that we continue to spin on, right? And it's not bad to iterate, but like I don't think we need another Slack app, So in the same way, disruption is, there's a severance, right? For there to be disruption, there has to be, here's what it was, and now we're way over here. It's almost like a subversion of something, right? And this is the work I'm interested in. This is the things that I do. So I only recommend people coming to me if you want to be disrupted. you know? And I do disruption as an act of devotion
Hmm.
because in life there's order and there's chaos, right? And entropy is a key part of life. Without that part of life, order doesn't come. And as I mentioned before, we have to discontinue what we're doing in order to continue. We have to disrupt out of devotion what we're doing in order to actually shift to the degree that life can continue to reorder itself and reconfigure itself, not reduplicate itself, which is what's happening now with iteration and innovation. So any innovation that isn't working with life, I would challenge the word of innovation. I hope that people can look inward, innovation,
Yeah.
like instinct, intelligence, intuition, innovation. There's a reason they all have in.
Yeah, I
So
completely agree. And I think
yeah,
real systems revolution, as you say, not systems change, but systems revolution, the best way we can start that process from our place in the ecosystem is actually start to look inwards for ourselves, start with
yeah.
ourselves. That for me feels like a real big takeaway here. Before we kind of lose ourselves in the broader picture, start with yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Because what we're witnessing externally is happening internally. You want to look at colonial extractivism and try to solve that? Well, you probably have to work on your own self-exploitation and boundary. You want to look at climate chaos? Why is your nervous system so dysregulated?
Hmm.
Like, why are they mirroring each other? You know,
Yeah.
the rising sea levels, the rising climate grief. I mean, how do you want to view it?
Yeah.
Do we want to see the mirrors, and do we want to actually take that responsibility? And if we do, then that's what we'll do. But if we don't, that's fine. We want to deny it. We want to push it away. But when you sweep things under the rug, they don't go away. They don't go away. They're just under the rug. So right now what's happening is the rug's being lifted and we're like, "Oh my God, look at all that stuff under there."
Yeah. Well, I love this
Yeah.
because I feel like what we've done from your expertise is starting to open the rug, lift it up, and actually look and confront what's underneath it rather than like turn away. So, Ryan,
Yeah.
this has been great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
And
you.
any final thoughts of how people can get in touch, how they can learn from you going forwards?
Yeah, as you've mentioned, Rebiz, which is reconnecting business with earth and awareness-based systems revelation and business as usual unschool. So people can come and learn in that. We have the actual Rebiz core course, and then we also have Project Tipping Point, which is working with social tipping point movements to seed kinship worldview for a post-growth beautiful future. Simultaneous to that, I also do individual and global consulting and speaking, and I also run immersions globally with indigenous elders in various different places. There's one coming up in Mexico. I have one coming up in the Brazilian Amazon, and there's a bunch of other ones that I do there where I bring people into those territories to learn with the people, to then see how we can become good allies of that knowledge and wisdom and build that into regenerative systems as well, so that we can have a knowledge systems interface as we diversify our epistemologies and ways of knowing. And outside of that, if you just want to get in touch with me, feel free. I have an Instagram and a LinkedIn, and I'm always available there. So, mahalo.